Okay, let's talk about the Withereds again. My recent video talking about the withered animatronics and the classic animatronics being the same was actually decently successful, but based on the comments, it doesn't seem like I convinced a lot of you, so I want to look at the most common arguments people have against this idea in the comments and try to clarify points as well as I can. If I can't convince you by the end, that's fine. I just want you all to understand as well as you can before you jump to just saying, they can't be the same, they look different. Speaking of which, they look different and have different endoskeletons. This is probably the most common argument I got, but it kinda misunderstands the general idea. Some people believe the animatronics were simply redesigned after the first Freddy's into the Withereds, and then redesigned back to the classics, which technically can work, but it's unnecessarily convoluted. This idea is referred to as retrofit theory, so when I bring it up later, you know what I'm talking about. Others believe the Withereds canonically just look like the classics, but Scott just made new models. This is also possible, but as I said in the last video, his own words a long time ago imply he would have just used the classic models if they were meant to look like them anyway. So they're canonically meant to look different, but why? Well, it's important to understand that the classic animatronics use Endo 01s, while the toys and the Withereds use Endo 02s. Endo 01s and 2s look very different from one another, so if the Withereds use 2s and the classics use 1s, how did one become the other? Well, while there are some very extremely noticeable differences, there are a lot of similarities in terms of the general shape. There are a few pieces that can't align at all, but there's not that many, almost as if the Endo 02 is just a redesigned Endo 01 that kinda removes a couple small things and adds a bunch of extra stuff. If you ask me, I think Phone Guy actually explains this on night 2 of FNAF 2.
By now I'm sure you've noticed the older models sitting in the back room. Those are from the previous location, and we just use them for parts now. The idea at first was to repair them. They even started retrofitting them with some of the newer technology, but they were just so ugly, and the smell.
This is important. He didn't say, we planned on retrofitting them with some of the newer technology, he said they started, but then decided to use the toys instead. The fact that the Endo 01s are called Endo 01s implies they came first. The toy animatronics being equipped with Endo 02s means those versions of the Endos are the upgraded, newer technology. What I think happened was that the withered animatronics were going to be used for the FNAF 2 location, so they upgraded their Endo 01s, turning them into Endo 02s, but decided instead to use the Endo 02s on brand new animatronics, the toys. Notice how in the newspaper it said that the toys are being scrapped due to malfunction. If the Withereds have the same tech in them, it makes sense that the Withereds would be kept and the Endo 02 technology would be removed, reverting them back to Endo 01s. This also doesn't fall under retrofit theory, as the endoskeletons changing is because of the technology, while changing the designs and then changing them back serves no real purpose. It actually makes a lot of sense for the Unwithereds to be the first animatronics, and for their shells to be redesigned considering the original animatronics were the ones that leaked blood and mucus, so redesigning them could help neglect some of the bad publicity. And it wouldn't be that hard to redesign the shells either. It's not the shells that are possessed, it's the endoskeletons. That's how the missing kids end up in the fun times, the possessed endos being melted and infused into them. So if the shells are completely brand new, that causes no problems at all. You could also say that it's just the same costumes on different shells. And what I mean by that is that in the Mimic story, Edwin's job is different to the games, instead being that he is supplied Fazbear costumes and is tasked with transforming them into animatronics, essentially meaning he builds metal or plastic shells and then stretches the fur costumes over them. That's why both the classics and the Withereds have actual fur, unlike the toys, which are made purely of smooth plastic and metal. It wouldn't be hard for them to just make new shells for the classics and then stretch the same costumes over the new ones. As I discussed in my Fredbear's Family Diner theory from a couple years ago, and have discussed a couple more times since, this explains why Phone Guy says the animatronics haven't been cleaned in 20 years. While the animatronics in full haven't existed that long, the costumes on them have. You can also take ID's Fantasies approach, that the classics at the first Freddy's use Endo 02s and that the Withereds have brand new shells, but the possessed Endos are used on them, and the classic shells are also possessed and put onto Endo 01s for FNAF 1. Basically, the first Freddy's animatronic shells are used for FNAF 1, and the Endos are used on the Withereds, allowing them to technically be separate animatronics that are still possessed by the missing kids. Personally, I don't take that approach though, because it doesn't account for the FNAF 2 newspaper saying the Withereds will be used for the FNAF 1 location, because under this theory, they won't be. But I think either idea kinda works at least. All that, or it's just a design inconsistency. Moving on, if the Withereds were reworked after FNAF 2, how did no one notice the bodies in the suits? The short answer, they did. In fact, they probably even noticed before FNAF 2. Like I said, they most likely altered the Endo 01s into Endo 02s, so they would have found the bodies before they did that. See, there's no reason the bodies can't be found. The problem would stem from the bodies being found publicly. But Fazbear Entertainment finding them and covering it up? It makes perfect sense. We've been shown time and time again in story after story that, with or without William Afton, Fazbear Entertainment is incredibly corrupt. Honestly, it would make complete sense for the bodies being found to be the reason the Withereds aren't used for FNAF 2 in the first place. I made a whole video on the topic of the bodies being found, so if you want more information about why I think they were, check that out. But honestly, the Withereds being the classics is a big reason I believe it in the first place. Like I said, it doesn't cause any problems, so you can't use it to argue against them being the same, but you can use them being the same to argue for the kids indeed being found. Withered Chica's bloodstain is just a texture bug from FNAF 2 that Steel will recreated. This actually seems to be true. An old render of Withered Chica shows her with what looks like blood on her endoskeleton, but it's actually just either a lighting or texture error, but Steel will ended up recreating it. However, this blood is very clearly not in the same spot, it's different. I feel like Scott wouldn't just let this slip by if it wasn't on purpose. While I don't think this bloodstain is the best or most reliable evidence, I don't think it should be completely discounted. One other thing I forgot to mention in the last video, which I don't think is necessarily important, but could be, is that Withered Bonnie and Chica approach from the left and right respectively, matching their behavior in FNAF 1, unlike Toy Bonnie and Chica who appear in the right and left respectively. Withered Foxy's hook is in FNAF 3. I'm gonna be completely honest, I didn't even know it was Withered Foxy, but it is. And I can sort of understand this argument, but I think people are kind of misrepresenting Fazbear's fright. Listen to what Phone Dude says on night 1 of FNAF 3.
We found another set of drawings, always nice, and a foxy head, which we think could be authentic. Then again, it might just be another crappy cosplay.
While the Fazbear's Fright crew definitely got some authentic Fazbear stuff from the old Freddy's locations, not everything they got was from there. If it was, they wouldn't just think it's a real Foxy head, they would know it. You can also sometimes see the real puppet on camera 8 with a reflection and everything, showing how the Phantom puppet, unlike the other Phantoms, is actually the real Charlotte. However, the fact that she physically appears is important because that same exact camera shows a puppet mask. And even if you don't think that Phantom puppet trigger is the real puppet, she still has to become Lefty, meaning that mask is not the original puppet mask. It's worth noting that it also has tear tracks, which the puppet doesn't have until it gets possessed by Charlotte. Now, the withered animatronics themselves, whether they're the classics or not, were real animatronics, and like the puppet, there's inevitably going to be recreations of them in that form, even if they didn't always look like that, and even if they don't look like that anymore. The point is, there's a good chance that hook is not an authentic Withered Foxy hook, it's just a recreation. Also, if it is the real Withered Foxy, then that doesn't matter much if you think the shells are completely different between the classics and the Withereds. The Withereds are from Fredbear's and the classics are from Freddy's. The problem with this argument is the language used by Phone Guy. See, if you say a previous location, that very obviously means one of the locations that was open prior to this one. But if you say the previous location, that absolutely means the one that was open directly before this one. That's just how English works, and that's what Phone Guy said. Meaning, even if FNAF 2 is the same building as Fredbear's, as many people believe, it's definitely not what Phone Guy was referring to. So yeah, the Withereds are from the first Freddy's, not Fredbear's. The newspaper isn't talking about the Withereds. The Withereds are just in a back room of FNAF 1 and go unused. The smell is from lack of maintenance. The reason I'm putting these all together is because there's not a whole lot to say about them. Claiming the newspaper isn't talking about the Withereds is difficult to argue against, it just doesn't make that much sense because why would it be saying that at all about animatronics that aren't in the game itself? Claiming that it doesn't say they'll be used and that they're just stored away is just a complete cop-out answer, because the newspaper would not say this at all if the Withereds aren't in FNAF 1 at all, so that is just not a good argument. Scott would not say the Withereds would be saved for FNAF 1, a game that is already out, if they didn't appear in FNAF 1. Same goes for the argument that the smell is just from lack of maintenance. Like, yeah, that's literally what the case is with the classics themselves. They don't clean them, but the reason they smell as much as they do is because of the dead bodies inside. That's why the classics smell even after the bodies are taken out. So the fact that it's called out for the Withereds at all is definitely not a coincidence. MatPat's FNAF 2 video is unreliable for the current lore. Why? Scott hasn't changed the lore of FNAF 2, it's still the same as it was back then. Even if you trust what the movie tells us about it, it's not like Scott just retconned it, it's still the same game and it's still the same story. Now sure, MatPat didn't get everything right in that video, but he still got almost everything right. He got Phone Guy being Purple Guy wrong, he probably got Charlotte dying at Fredbear's and the puppet stuffing the kids wrong, and he probably got some of the smaller stuff wrong. But he probably didn't get any other big information wrong if Scott said he got almost everything right. So those were all the the arguments against the Withereds being the classics. But what about the arguments that the Unwithereds were the performers at the first Freddy Fazbear's Pizza? Did you guys convince me that that's not the case? I mean, no, not really, but I don't think it really matters that much. I don't think all the arguments you guys and so many other people have provided are without merit. I actually think most of them are completely fair. I will offer alternate explanations, but I'll admit that a lot of them are ad hoc arguments, aka arguments that don't really have solid evidence, but still can work even if they're not really implied to. So I will still go over your arguments, starting with: the secret of the Mimic audio logs are about the spring locks, not the prototype classics. This one actually popped up a lot, but I honestly just think it's a misconception. See, there are 2 logs down here, and I'm gonna play both of them for you. Take a listen to the first one.
Test. Journal entry. I got the change order from Hen last night. None of this makes sense. I'm almost done. Why change it now? It would be so much easier to keep using the spring locks. Just hire some teens to wear the suits like we always do.
In this log, Edwin is very calm, indicating this is probably the first time this has happened. Basically what it means is that Edwin was building springlock suits for Henry, and then Henry changed the order to animatronics that were not springlock suits. Now listen to the next one.
Aren't they insane? The look of these new animatronics is Fiona's design and they're great. Oh, first they approved the art, then they approved the proofs. Now they changed their minds when we're so close to final. Why would they change them now? Are they pulling my leg? The new concepts are, frankly, creepy. No, it doesn't matter. I'm not changing a single bit of her work, and they can't make me.
This one is about the animatronics Edwin and Fiona designed to replace the springlocks. They are completely new designs for the characters. These ones are evidently not the springlock suits. Now, I've heard people suggest that the ones Edwin and Fiona made are the toys or some other version of the characters, and the classics down here are the new ones Henry ordered, because the classics are supposed to be creepy. But I don't think that's the case at all. There are 2 audio logs down here, logs about 2 different sets of animatronics. In this area, there are, again, 2 sets of animatronics. It makes no sense that one of the 2 logs is about one of the sets of animatronics down here, and the other log is about a completely different set. Some people also say that Edwin doesn't always do what he says, like how he rejects making animatronics for sports use, yet the lion mascot wears a varsity jacket and in general just looks like a sports mascot. In other words, Edwin often says one thing, but then does something that contradicts it. So what's stopping him from changing his mind and making the new replacement animatronics? Well, first of all, I kind of doubt it, because in this case, changing his mind would disrespect Fiona's designs, which I don't think he would do based on how adamant he is that they can't make him do it, especially if this is after she dies. Regardless of whether he does make those new animatronics or not, it doesn't make sense that these are the new ones. These aren't the replacements, these are the ones that got replaced. Essentially, they were ordered to make the springlock suits, and they do, but right before they're complete, Henry and Afton order new animatronics, ones that aren't springlocks, the classics. Fiona makes the new designs for them, and they complete the bulk of the animatronics. Henry and Afton change the order again, they change them to the Withereds, and Edwin refuses to make them. Both the springlocks and the classics, the animatronics that were both replaced, are the ones in R&D, and the final animatronic order is not present in the game. So if Edwin doesn't make the Unwithereds, that leaves Henry to make them instead, or alternatively, you could even say they never get made. That's right, I'm not going to defend this. I don't think Secret of the Mimic supports the Unwithereds existing anymore. See, if you don't believe the Unwithereds were the performers at the first Freddy's, you can easily just say that Henry and Afton only ordered new animatronics to push Edwin's business further into the ground, and then when they get what they want out of him, they just use the classics, the ones that Edwin and Fiona made. My point is that you can believe that the classics were the ones Edwin made, and you can believe that the classics are the ones at the first Freddy's. It's not mutually exclusive, and you can have both. I fully admit that I was wrong to use this as evidence, but you can't use the logs, or this game as a whole, to argue against the Unwithereds being the performers at the first Freddy's. They don't have to be, but this doesn't really support either side because it works with either side. The classics are the animatronics at the first Freddy's in the Silver Eyes, movies, and Into the Pit. This is something I addressed in the other video, how those are universes without FNAF 2 and FNAF 1 ever opening, so it's not really the same scenario. But I have had some people ask why that means it can't be accurate, and to that I say, it doesn't. It doesn't have to mean it's not accurate to the games, but you can't really use this as evidence, because it's a very different scenario. Think of it from Scott's point of view. If there's only one Freddy Fazbear's Pizza location, and there's 3 sets of animatronics to choose from, those being the Withereds, Toys, and the Classics, which ones will you choose? say the Withereds would be the one that matches the game universe. It still doesn't really make sense to use them. It makes more sense to use the classics because they're, well, classic. They're the most recognizable and iconic animatronics in the series, so it just makes sense to use them even if it's not accurate to that part of the timeline in the games. So again, this doesn't mean the classics can't be the ones at the first Freddy's, but it also doesn't mean they have to be. The unwithered Freddy in FNAF 6 is just a re-render of Withered Freddy in FNAF 2. So what? Just because it's a re-render of FNAF 2 Withered Freddy doesn't mean it's not canon. It's in the opening cutscene as a part of Fazbear Entertainment's logo. It's also not exactly the same, being reversed and having Freddy pointing at you rather than reaching for you. So yeah, it's not exactly the same, and even if it was, it's a canonical piece of media, and there's no reason to disregard it. Fazbear wouldn't just use this as their logo if it was never on stage. Fredbear in Ultimate Custom Night looks more like Classic Freddy. I can kind of understand this point, because the design is very similar to Classic Freddy, but it isn't exactly the same. Note the slimmer head and the smaller ears. This version of Fredbear also notably does not match the Fredbear from the Bite of 83 minigame, though the one from Secret of the Mimic does. Even if this is meant to be one of the original Fredbear designs, he doesn't have to be the same design of the other animatronics for the time, especially since things aren't one-to-one. Classic Freddy is on the FNAF VR Faz coin that says, Freddy Fazbear's Pizza since 1983. I honestly don't think this is a very good piece of evidence because the coin says since 1983, meaning the coin was made after 83. The version of Freddy on the coin would be whatever Freddy design was used at the time, so if the Unwithereds were the performers at the first Freddy's but the coin was made during the FNAF 1 location, the coin would still have Classic Freddy on it. But it's really these last 2 points that I have a really hard time arguing against. The week before refers to the classics as vintage. This is something I touched upon in the last video. How Ralph saying they restored the vintage Freddy to his classic look probably refers to Toy Freddy being the previous version of Freddy, and this one being repaired to look more similar to the original, rather than meaning it was literally the same design as the one he had at the first Freddy's. I stand by that working fine, but there was something else I missed in the week before, this quote right here. Quote, "The hallway is decorated with cheerful stars and a checkerboard stripe matching the floor tiles, but the dim light from the line fixture overhead makes the fading decor seem almost sinister, especially the vintage character posters for Chica, Freddy, and Bonnie." End quote. See, it's not just the Freddy animatronic that is designed as vintage. The posters themselves are vintage, meaning these are posters that were present at the first Freddy Fazbear's Pizza. Given these posters are of the classics as we see in that hallway in FNAF 1, that implies that the classics were the originals. The only way I can defend this is just it being an oversight, but other than that, retrofit theory is what makes the most sense. It also makes sense with the next and last argument, the FNAF 2 dream sequences show the classics rather than the Unwithereds. Pretty simple point, but an effective one. These cutscenes could be a flash forward to FNAF 1, or Scott could have just not made models for the Unwithereds considering FNAF 2 was kind of a rushed game and these are only in a dark cutscene anyway, but these are very much cop-out arguments, especially since Scott probably made the Unwithereds before even making them withered. It's honestly really hard to argue against, which is why I'm not really trying to. The thing is, I think the Withereds and the classics being the same animatronics is pretty much undeniable, but the Unwithereds being the performers at the first Freddy's, it's a lot more up in the air, and honestly, I might be opening up a bit towards retrofit theory. Doesn't mean I believe it, but the fact that I'm having such a hard time defending against this stuff, and the fact that there is this much stuff to combat makes it seem like it's probably just true. The classics being the OG animatronics is just the simplest option. Them becoming the Withereds and then becoming the classics again? Not really, and it's kind of dumb story-wise, but it almost seems like the surrounding information makes it pretty likely. Retrofit theory can work, and it also aligns with a lot of the merch in some of the early games like FNAF 4 and FNAF 2 having designs much more similar to the classics, like the Fredbear plushie and the Bite Victim's other plushies, as well as the plushies that you unlock in FNAF 2. The FNAF 2 dream sequences, the vintage posters, the Fredbear design, and the alternate universes just make that idea fit a bit more cleanly. I'm very confident that the Withereds design is not just a retcon or just a lazy addition, so I think if the classics were the original designs, then retrofit theory is the most likely. As I mentioned earlier, I think the Withereds were redesigned into the classics to avoid bad PR due to the blood and mucus that came out of their eyes and mouths. You could argue that since they were going to use the Withereds for the FNAF 2 location, they redesigned them then, upgraded the Endoskeletons with the new tech, and then decided not to use them. This honestly works perfectly fine. Hyperdroid's recent FNAF 1 video makes a great case towards the classics being the performers at the original Freddy's, going over some evidence I have and some I haven't gone over in this video, such as Ticket to Fun showing a fixed classic Foxy which never exists in the FNAF 1 location, Pizza Party being a recreation of the missing children incident and using the classics, the arcades in Into the Pit being in the 1985 location and having the classics on them, but also matching the FNAF 3 arcades, implying those classic designs are on the arcades in the 85 location in the games too, and finally Dead by Daylight having the classics in the 85 Freddy's as well. Though honestly, that last one I don't think is really evidence because Afton got spring-locked in the FNAF 1 location, so it would be the classics anyway, so that one doesn't really matter. But still, there's just two things that keep me from actually believing it. First, it's really hard to justify why they would switch the designs back. If they change the designs to avoid bad PR, and then those animatronics don't end up outside the parts and service room anyway, and those designs don't get bad PR too, then why would they change them back to the designs with the bad PR in the first place? Second, if the Unwithereds weren't ever performers, why would Fazbear Entertainment have Unwithered Freddy in one of their logos? Even if Edwin was originally supposed to make him, if he never did make him, and if Henry also didn't make him, and if the classics were turned into the Withereds after FNAF 2 but they never ended up being public characters, then why would Unwithered Freddy be a public figure representing the company? Also, like I've said throughout this video and the other one, I'm extremely confident in the Withereds and the classics being the same animatronics, even if retrofit theory is true. But if it is, then Withered Foxy should theoretically have never been seen, so how would there be a replica of him in the FNAF 3 office? Obviously this is only a problem if the shells are brand new, costumes and all, but if they're not, then this Withered Foxy hook should technically not be found in any back rooms, at least not with this fur attached. It would also be weird if they remade the shells for the classics and they were already withered when they were redesigned, because why would they intentionally make withered animatronics? And there's just not enough time for them to get this withered naturally. Arguing that it's just the costumes themselves that are withered rather than the shells doesn't make sense, because the holes in them go all the way through the shell, and Withered Bonnie should have a shell on his face and arm, and Withered Chica should have a shell for her hands, but they don't. It's just weird, and while it fits with a lot of stuff, it just doesn't fit perfectly with everything. Regardless, let me know in the comments what you guys think, whether or not you think the Withereds and the classics are the same, and if you think the Unwithereds were the performers at the first Freddy's, and if you did enjoy this video, make sure to leave a like and subscribe if you want to, and I'll see you all in the next video. Bye guys!